Most men think red flags in relationships are obvious, loud, dramatic, easy to spot. But the truth is a lot more uncomfortable. The most dangerous signals are usually the quiet ones, the ones that look harmless, the ones that feel normal at first, and that's exactly why so many men ignore them. These are the subtle red flags that slowly show up in the beginning. Small behaviors, strange patterns, little moments that don't seem like a big deal, until one day it's too late. In this video, you'll discover 10 subtle red flags most men ignore, the kind that quietly destroy relationships before you even realize what's happening. And if you're a man who wants to understand women, relationships, and human psychology on a deeper level, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We're building a community of men who want to become smarter and stronger in relationships, and our next goal is 1,000 subscribers. Join us and be part of it. Topic 1. She moves too fast emotionally at the beginning. A lot of men interpret intensity as something rare and special. When a woman shows a lot of enthusiasm in the first few weeks, texts all day, and talks like there's already a deep connection, he naturally thinks he's found something different. And to be fair, sometimes it really is just chemistry. But a more experienced man eventually learns that when everything moves way too fast at the start of a relationship, there might be something happening behind the emotional scenes that isn't obvious yet. It's pretty common to see situations where, after just a few dates, she's already talking about traveling together, saying how he's different from every other guy, or even mentioning the future with a level of certainty that feels a little too big for such a short time. For many men, this feels like validation. After all, who doesn't like feeling special? The problem is that real, deep connections usually take time to build. When the intensity shows up before the foundation, what looks like passion can sometimes just be emotional need trying to latch onto someone quickly. An older mentor once said something interesting about this: healthy relationships grow like a tree, not like dry grass catching fire.
Ow.
They grow slowly, build strong roots, and become stable over time. But connections that start with extreme intensity often burn fast and disappear just as quickly. That's why attentive men look for something simple: consistency over time. And when that early intensity starts revealing little curious behaviors, that's when even subtler signs begin to show up. Topic 2. She never takes responsibility for anything. As time goes on, something interesting starts to appear in conversations. Whenever she talks about her past, there's a quiet pattern many men don't notice at first. The ex-boyfriend was always the villain. The boss was unfair. The friends were fake. The family never understood her. In every story from her life, someone else was the problem, except her. And at first, a man usually listens with empathy because, let's be honest, everyone has gone through difficult situations. But more observant men start noticing something beyond the story itself. They don't just pay attention to what happened, but how she talks about what happened. Emotionally mature people usually acknowledge at least a small piece of responsibility in their own experiences. Something like, "I could have handled that better," or looking back, "I also made mistakes there." When that reflection never shows up, and every story points to someone else being the problem, it reveals a lot more about someone's emotional pattern than the story itself. Imagine a man getting to know someone and realizing every one of her past relationships ended the same way. The other person was always immature, toxic, or manipulative. Sure, that can happen once or twice in someone's life. But when the list of villains keeps growing and self-reflection is still missing, a quiet question starts forming in his mind. If everyone else was the problem, what actually happened in those relationships? And once that question starts appearing, other small behaviors begin to stand out too. Topic 3. Her words and actions don't match. At the beginning of a relationship, kind words come easily. She says she enjoys spending time with him, that she feels good when they're together, that she admires who he is. And for any man, hearing things like that naturally creates a sense of security. After all, when someone says something confidently, the instinct is to believe it. But more attentive men understand that in relationships, words only tell half the story. The other half shows up in behavior. Over time, small details begin to surface. She says she wants to see him but keeps canceling plans at the last minute. She says honesty matters to her, but avoids direct conversations when something feels off. She says he's important to her, yet disappears for days without explanation. Individually, each situation seems small, almost irrelevant. But when these moments start repeating themselves, a quiet pattern begins to form. And patterns usually tell a much more honest story than carefully chosen words. Experienced men learn a simple principle: watch for consistency. When words and actions move in the same direction, trust grows naturally. But when there's a constant gap between what someone says and what they actually do, something isn't aligned. And the interesting part is that many men notice this misalignment early, but choose to ignore it, hoping things will eventually fix themselves. The problem is that while he's trying to interpret these contradictions, another subtle behavior often begins to appear. Topic 4. She constantly tests his boundaries. In many relationships, the first tests don't show up in obvious ways. They appear disguised as jokes, subtle comments, or small situations that seem harmless. Maybe she makes a joke that goes a little too far. Maybe she makes a provocative comment in front of other people. Or maybe she ignores something he already said bothers him. It's the first time it happens. Most men just brush it off. After all, no one wants to look overly sensitive about something small. But attentive men understand that boundaries are rarely tested in dramatic ways at the beginning. They're tested slowly, in small doses, almost invisibly. It's like someone lightly touching an electric fence, just to see if it's actually on. For example, she might mention another guy to trigger a reaction, or she might push him to do something he already said he wasn't comfortable with. And when a boundary gets ignored without consequence, the next test usually becomes a little bigger. A man who knows how to navigate relationships understands that respect and attraction go hand in hand. When he communicates his boundaries calmly, without aggression, but also without hesitation, something interesting happens. Respect increases. It's not about creating unnecessary conflict. It's about showing through his actions that he values himself. And interestingly enough, when these little tests begin appearing, they often come along with another quiet behavior. One that reveals a constant need for attention. Topic 5. She needs constant attention and validation. At first, receiving a lot of attention from someone can feel flattering. She texts often, reacts to everything he posts, and wants to know what he's doing most of the time. For many men, this even looks like a sign of genuine interest. After all, who doesn't like feeling desired? The problem is that there's a big difference between someone who enjoys your presence and someone who needs your attention to feel okay about themselves. Over time, certain patterns begin to appear. If he takes a little longer to reply, she gets annoyed. If he's busy with work or friends, she starts hinting that he doesn't care as much anymore. Sometimes comments pop up like "you've changed" or "you used to talk to me more." It's not necessarily a big conflict, but a constant pressure for validation. And many men unknowingly fall into that cycle, trying to compensate for every little frustration with even more attention. More experienced men notice something important here. Emotionally balanced people can enjoy their lives without needing constant validation. They have friends, hobbies, interests, routines. But when someone constantly needs attention, relationship can start feeling less like a partnership and more like emotional maintenance. And interestingly, when this dynamic starts forming, another detail from her past often begins to show up in conversations. Topic 6. Her past relationships are always crazy stories. At some point, every relationship conversation ends up touching on the past. Stories about exes naturally come up, whether during a casual dinner conversation or in deeper moments of sharing experiences. And at first, most men simply listen with curiosity. After all, everyone carries a few complicated stories in their emotional baggage. That alone isn't unusual. But over time, certain patterns begin to stand out. Every ex-boyfriend was crazy, toxic, controlling, or impossible to deal with. The stories might sound convincing when heard individually. The issue appears when almost every past relationship follows the exact same storyline. It's like watching several different movies, realizing the villain always looks the same. More experienced men don't judge someone purely based on their past, but they do observe behavioral patterns over time. When every story paints the same picture, where she was always the victim and everyone else was always the problem, it may reveal something deeper about how she views relationships. And interestingly enough, when this pattern appears, another behavior often shows up right after, one that many men mistake for love. Topic 7. She gets jealous extremely fast. At the beginning of a relationship, a little jealousy can seem normal. For some men, It even feels like a sign that she cares. Maybe she makes a comment about a female coworker, asks who the woman was that liked a photo, or jokes about not sharing in small doses. Many men interpret this as something almost innocent, but attentive men start noticing when this behavior appears too early or with unexpected intensity. Sometimes the relationship is still in the early stages, and she already feels uncomfortable when he mentions female friends, coworkers, or normal everyday situations. In some cases, frequent questions start appearing about where he is, who he's with, or why he took longer to reply. The key point here is that healthy trust usually takes time to develop. When jealousy shows up before there's even a real foundation of commitment, it may reveal emotional insecurity or a need for control. Men who have experienced a few relationships understand that balanced connections start with freedom and mutual respect. And interestingly, when this insecurity appears, it often comes together with another curious behavior. Topic 8. She avoids deep conversations. At the beginning of any relationship, it's natural for conversations to stay light. People talk about movies, travel, favorite foods, funny stories from the past. Everything flows easily without pressure. But over time, when two people are truly getting to know each other, certain topics begin to appear naturally: values, life goals, meaningful experiences, even fears and lessons learned. And that's when some men start noticing something interesting. Whenever the conversation begins, getting a little deeper, she changes the subject. Sometimes she cracks a joke, grabs her phone, or turns the moment back into something superficial. If he asks about life plans or how she views relationships, the answers are vague, quick, or redirected with humor. At first, this might just seem like personality, someone lighthearted and easygoing. But when the pattern repeats constantly, it starts revealing something more. Men who pay attention understand that emotional depth is part of any real connection. It doesn't mean heavy conversations all the time, but the ability to step into meaningful topics when necessary. When someone consistently avoids that type of dialogue, it may be because they don't want certain parts of their life exposed, or simply aren't ready to build something deeper. And when that avoidance appears, another behavior often shows up alongside it. Topic 9. She only shows interest when he pulls away. There's a curious dynamic many men have experienced without fully understanding it. While he's showing interest, texting first, trying to plan dates, and investing energy into the relationship, she seems slightly distant. Responses are short, enthusiasm feels moderate, and the conversation energy sometimes feels a little cold. Nothing dramatic. It's just a subtle sense that something isn't balanced. But then something changes. When he gets busy, takes longer to reply, or starts focusing more on his own life, suddenly she becomes much more interested. Messages increase. Tension grows. She seems far more engaged than before. For many men, this is confusing. They interpret it as a sign she finally realized his value. But in reality, it may reveal a specific emotional dynamic. Some people are more attracted to the feeling of chasing than to the stability of a consistent connection. When attention is guaranteed, motivation drops. But when there's a possibility of losing that attention, interest suddenly returns. Men who've gone through this before learn to observe consistency over time, not just moments of intensity. And when this dynamic starts appearing, there's usually one final signal, perhaps the quietest one of all. Topic 10. Something feels off. But he ignores his intuition. There's a moment many men have experienced but rarely talk about. It's not logical and it's hard to explain. It's just a quiet feeling that something isn't quite right. It's nothing big enough to justify a decision, but not small enough to completely ignore. It's that thought that pops up in the back of the mind and quickly gets pushed aside with phrases like, "Maybe I'm overthinking," or "It's probably nothing." The truth is that male intuition is often more accurate than people realize. It's built from small signals the brain notices before the conscious mind can organize them into clear thoughts. A strange comment here. An inconsistent action there. An emotional reaction that feels slightly out of place. Individually, each detail seems irrelevant. But together, they create that hard-to-ignore feeling. Men who learn from experience start treating that internal signal as an important alert. It doesn't mean making impulsive decisions or judging someone too early. It simply means paying closer attention to what's happening. Because when people look back after a relationship ends, There's usually one sentence that appears in their memory. Deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. Conclusion. The truth is, most men don't lose relationships because of one big mistake. They lose them because they ignore small signals for too long. Signals that were there from the beginning. The problem isn't that these subtle red flags are invisible. It's that many men choose not to see them. But now you know better. Awareness changes everything. When you start paying attention to patterns, behaviors, and consistency, your entire perspective on relationships becomes sharper and stronger. So here's a question worth thinking about. Looking back at your past relationships, were there red flags you noticed but ignored? Moments when something felt off, but you pushed that feeling aside? And more importantly, what will you do differently next time? Real growth begins when a man decides he will no longer ignore the lessons life keeps showing him. If this video helped you see relationships from a new perspective, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This channel is for men who want to become wiser, more aware, and more confident in relationships and in life. And we're currently working toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers. So if you want to be part of this growing community of men improving themselves every day, hit the subscribe button and join us.